Afternoon and welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we will discuss continuous monitoring to secure cyberspace with government and industry leaders. With me in the show today are John Streufert, the Director of Federal Network Resilience, Department of Homeland Security; Rod Turk, the Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Commerce; Bill Lay, the Deputy CIO, Information Assurance, and the Chief Information Security Officer, Department of State; Richard Marcell, the Deputy Director, Information Management, U.S. Army G2; Scott Montgomery, the VP and CTO for Public Sector at Intel Security; and Matt Dean, the VP for Product Strategy at Firemon. Let's get right into the issues. Let's start with John Streufert. John, DHS seems to be like in the middle of all the continuous monitoring that's going on. Can you give us some examples maybe of some areas where you see progress being made to improve security?
Well, Jim, I'd like to narrow it down to just one, but
Okay.
I'm pleased to report to you that at this juncture, the focus of our program is protecting networks and civilian government. We now have more than 96% of .gov signed up. That's 124 discrete segments, and I'm very happy to tell you that we're covering all 23 of the 23 CFO Act reporting agencies. So our coverage is excellent, and within the next 20 weeks, we should be starting off providing basic services and continuous monitoring sensors to all of the people I've just named under a task order competition.
Wow, terrific. That sounds great. Rod Turk, how about over at Department of Commerce? Can you give us some examples of areas where you see progress being made with continuous monitoring?
Well, I'm really happy to say that I'm one of the 23, Department of Commerce is one of the 23 that John referred to. And we have benefited greatly from John's work over at the Federal Network Resiliency Group over in Homeland Security. We are implementing a continuous monitoring tool in the Department of Commerce, commerce-wide.
Okay.
And in fact, this is for the Department of Commerce, is the first shared service type initiative within the department in the IT organization, as well as the information security area. So we're really excited about this. We're about 50% deployed right now. We expect to be totally complete with the deployment by the end of the fiscal year. And this is then going to provide us with information regarding patch levels, asset management, and secure baseline information that we think at the device level is going to give us some real serious input into our security
It
process.
covers all the subcomponents, or
Absolutely.
the plan is to cover all the subcomponents?
All 12 of the subcomponents in the department.
And NOAA and so forth.
Census, NOAA, PTO, all of them.
Yeah, terrific. Scott Montgomery at Intel Security, tell us how you're positioning to support customers in areas and some of the examples you could cite for progress being made.
I think overall, the one thing I would say is that there's a shift in the education that we're doing, where in the FISMA era there was a focus upon the compliance report,
Right.
and that compliance report, while an important effort, didn't necessarily equal a security posture.
Right.
And that education, I think the CDM program laid out by Homeland has really given the framework for organizations to understand that it's an ongoing fight, not a once-in-a-while report-based fight.
Right. Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, I testified a number of times when I was in government about FISMA, and and it kept pressure on, but it wasn't really fixing problems. It was more, a paperwork exercise in some cases and so forth. And see, I can get away with saying that stuff now that I'm no longer in the government. Bill Lay, Department of State, give us some examples, Bill, that where you see progress being made with continuous monitoring in your area.
Well, State also is one of the 23 agencies benefiting from John's work. And actually, I followed John at State. He really got the whole continuous monitoring idea and structure in place at State about 5 years ago. We're continuing down that path. We're making very good strides. The BPA and the contract that he's got in place that the rest of the federal government can take advantage of, we're leveraging. We're using the platform he started, even though it was early days. It's robust, and we're filling it in with new tools that are available through the new contract to expand its capability. We found over the last year, as we migrated from Windows XP to Windows 7, the continuous monitoring capability really gave us a good day-to-day situational awareness that was really beneficial in what would be a normal rollout
Right.
Well, it's a cybersecurity tool. It really provided additional benefits to our operations staff.
Yeah, man, this is terrific. I mean, from my days when I was a vice chair of the CIO Council running government-wide programs, I know the struggle to get government-wide approaches. So it's really exciting to hear the fact that everybody seems to be talking from the same page of music here, moving along. Matt Dean over at Firemon, can you tell us how your company positions to support your customers and examples of things you're doing and making progress with continuous monitoring?
Sure, absolutely. We've been focused on monitoring the network for a very long time, almost 10 years now. What gets me excited is when I go into organizations and see some operational successes. So I enjoy the conversations with the operators who are tactically working to secure the network, who now have data that they didn't have before, and they're making better decisions. They're getting more insight into the network, how it's operating, and how they should adapt that network to better secure their assets. And so I get excited when I see real results, and I love that at the operational level.
Yeah, it's always nice to see a plan actually come together. And Richard Marcell, how about over at U.S. Army? How are you guys doing with continuous monitoring? Give us some examples of where you see progress being made.
Sure, Jim. Army is making progress in its continuous monitoring efforts, and I'll give you two examples. But working with the Defense Information Systems Agency, we have two initiatives that are ongoing. A continuous enhancement of the host-based security system to allow us to really get insight into what our assets are on the network and their compliance with, of course, with security settings. And secondly, working with DISA to establish new points of new infrastructure on the unclassified network, which will now be standardized across the Army and will include both active and passive sensors to allow us to do a much better job with computer network defense. These initiatives are critical because they will also help input data, provide data to our evolving insider threat capabilities that the department is complying with in accordance with President Obama's directive back in 2012.
Right. And of course, we have the examples of that insider threat and some of the issues. Scott, you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think something else that's going on at the Department of Defense is very interesting. For the first time in recent memory, the language that both the civilian government and the Department of Defense is literally the same as it relates to continuous diagnostics and monitoring. So Mr. Kai basically edited or drafted memos that said, we're not going to try and break new ground. There's a working model over at Homeland, and we're going to mirror that model as much as is possible. And I think this helps government-wide because it creates a standard that basically you don't have to reinvent a wheel that's already rolling. And I think that's great progress for government.
Well, I do too. I think, to have Homeland, DOD, and I would think a third piece of that, John, maybe you comment, would be GSA with some of their future Network 2020 and things like that. The coordination there could pretty much covers the gambit of the government scope.
Jim, I think you're actually couldn't be closer to the real crux of the problem. The kind of incidents that we're seeing in the government sector, particularly at the federal level, are rarely restricted to a particular business unit. A threat of one kind that shows up in a part of government almost inevitably will roll other directions. So the Office of Management and Budget put out its instruction, Memorandum 14-03, that asked us to look at the needs of the government from the point of view of continuous monitoring holistically. They had some stepping stones that were put in place a couple of years ago with Cyberscope, and the early stages of that gathered up some of the process and compliance approaches that were early in the Federal Information Security Management Act. But from the very beginning, the federal CIO, Vivek Kundra at the time, envisioned a future point at which automated data feeds could substitute for some of the qualitative assessments that the departments and agencies were doing. So our conversations now, which include the Department of Defense and the Committee on National Security Systems, look forward to a day when data collection at the endpoint level, where specific risks, previously known flaws can be gathered up, And then trend information can be assembled at the federal level that we can show in a dashboard and eventually incorporate into the summaries that OMB now sponsors and the cross-agency priorities. And as it turns out, continuous monitoring is one of those three that are active of attention. So though we have different title authorities under the Code of Federal Regulations and statute, we see that collectively we want to get that information to where it can become actionable. That's probably a specific repair on the local level, but if we can get a enterprise view of where our most serious problems are, we can reposition as necessary to shore up the defenses.
Yeah, terrific answer. Rod, Turk, how about a specific program? Could you cite like a program of commerce that you feel now is more secure because of putting in place better continuous monitoring?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, when I take a look at Department of Commerce, and I think the same is true with most other departments, basic cyber hygiene is really what we need to be looking at at a very base level. And as you take a look at what's going on in the department, making sure that we know what our assets are, making sure that we've got the proper configuration set on each one of those assets, and then being able to determine patch levels, as I mentioned earlier. I think those are three critical elements in the cyber hygiene process. And if you take that analogy another step in terms of the healthcare kind of analogy, looking at like a Center for Disease Control, let's say, where all things health come through the Center for Disease Control. They do information, they do knowledge, they do research, those kinds of things. I think that's what Homeland Security is looking towards in terms of a resiliency for the network, to be able to do that kind of a function for the cyber world. So the term cyber hygiene really does have kind of a lot of threads into how we really need to take a look at the cybersecurity role.
Yeah, John?
Well, appreciate Rod bringing that up. The Center for Strategic and International Studies has told us that 75% of the attacks use known vulnerabilities that could be patched, that more than 90% of the successful attacks require only the most basic techniques to mitigate, and perhaps of overriding importance, 96% of the successful breaches that they had monitored can be avoided if the department or agency puts in place simple or intermediate controls. So what Rod is looking forward to is a future point where the basic hygiene, trust in hardware objects, trust in software objects, can contribute to a weather map that would indicate what parts of the government sector are under greatest stress. And those that are working on the future weather map technology look at CDM as foundational, because we can't draw a conclusion without knowing about the hardware assets and software assets that are out there and under management.
Sure. Once we get that, then we just need to get proactive and get out in front of those known threats. Richard Marcell, how about a specific program over Army that you think is in better shape now or more secure because of continuous monitor being implemented?
Right. So 2 years ago, Army kicked off an initiative to begin to do user activity monitoring on one of the classified networks. Before we started this, we really had no insight into what people were doing with the data and the resources that they had access to. And so starting from with nothing, we went off and put that program in place. And it's operational now. And what we found is that, sure enough, we discovered that there were a lot of things that are going on in the network that we were unaware of people doing basically, things that even though they have training, they don't always remember the training. Right. So we started discovering those things. And we did a campaign plan to alert that part of the Army what was going on. And so what we've observed over time is that now we're getting better behavior on the network because people are aware, more knowledgeable of what they're supposed to be doing and complying with that. And now we can actually see what's happening. And then this will be used as a foundation layer as we move into compliance with insider threat requirements as we move forward across the Army.
Terrific, great. Bill A., how about over at State? Is there a specific program you'd cite as being an example of one that is improved security-wise because of continuous monitoring?
Yes, on the PC side, we really took advantage of our Windows 7 migration over the last year to come up with a standard configuration that had all of the agents and the tools to inform our continuous monitoring set.
Oh, good.
Whether it was sensors or just making sure the monitors was picking everything up. And so we've got a much higher percentage now of visibility on our entire network infrastructure. In addition, as we move into mobile and move toward a post-PC type of environment, we're ensuring that we put sensors and agents out there, so we're capturing those too. The key to continuous monitoring is, one, making sure you're getting casting a wide net, getting all those devices out there. You don't have a lot of gaps. And two, getting your data in a normalized fashion so when you actually capture it, you end up with a big data problem. So you want to make sure that the data that you do have is useful.
Right.
And so when you process it and filter it, you can do something with it. It becomes actionable at that point.
Yeah. Well, have done a number of shows on big data too, and that's a hot topic. Matt Dean, how about at Firemon? Can you cite a specific program that you're aware of that you think has made strides and improvements because of implementing continuous monitoring?
Couple of examples, and I love the hygiene analogy.
Yeah, I
It's
like
something-
that. Every show I come up with, someone comes up with a new word that then I can use other times. So I hope you guys don't mind if I steal your.
And we focused at our company with the notion of cleanup. And we've seen networks kind of grow organically over the past 20, 25 years
Sure.
without a lot of insight into how that access was happening. And so as the networks grew, as the assets were placed, were moved across the network access lots of times stayed in place but was simply outdated. And so we've seen a number of different organizations implement programs to simply go through a cleanup process. Find access that is simply no longer used, remove that, simplify, reduce complexity, and then get on with the daily monitoring. And I think the monitoring becomes much more effective when that hygiene has happened.
Yeah, terrific. Very good. Scott Montgomery, what can you cite a specific program maybe that you're aware of that you think has improved dramatically or made improvements?
I think basically because we're very pervasive. We're in every organization. Our parent company, Intel Corporation, is providing goods and services to everyone here.
Sure.
And one of the things, what I would say is that the continuous monitoring effort, it actually mirrors this strategy of Intel Corporation in the acquisition of McAfee, which is now Intel Security, to create a mechanism by which, and we referred to hygiene, but if you think about cyber defense as the human nervous system, part of the thing about the continuous monitoring effort is let's not go throw out what we have. We have sensors in place. We have sensors that work. We have nerve endings that work all over our network. And the network is like that nervous system. We can take something that's found by an existing sensor or by a Delta sensor that's purchased through the CDM program and get results, meaningful results that are actionable, much like the central nervous system. I want to have actionable intelligence delivered to me in the place that I can apply the best effort that helps the body. And it's absolutely mirroring the Intel strategy as well.
Yeah, terrific. Another great analogy. I like you guys are great in making things easy to understand. Because it's a very complex set of issues that you have with any cybersecurity programs. I want to talk about lessons learned, and as we've been in this for a couple of years now, we'll talk about lessons learned. But before we do that, we're going to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with John Streufert from Homeland Security, Rod Turk from Commerce, Bill Lay from Department of State, Richard Marcell from the U.S. Army, Scott Montgomery from Intel Security, and Matt Dean from Firemon. We're talking about continuous diagnostic monitoring. We've talked about progress. We talked about some examples. We've been in this now for several years, and so I'm imagining that we've been through lots of ups and downs, learned a lot of things. Let's start with you this time, Bill Lay over at State. What are some examples of lessons learned to date with these initiatives that might help other government colleagues and even industry players that are working these issues?
Well, Jim, thanks to John Streufert's leadership, State's been at this about 5 years or more now.
Okay.
We do have a lot of lessons learned, and we've grown quite a bit over, especially the last 3 years as we mature our program. I think the biggest lesson learned is to ensure that we're communicating effectively what we're trying to achieve and do. Once you have a continuous monitoring program in place, people start to make assumptions. It's like, oh, well, what is our tool telling us?
Right.
Well, we want to make sure we're providing accurate information. We're not giving them a false sense of security. So we want to make sure that, one, when we say we have a good, as we used the term earlier, a high level of cyber hygiene, that's actually the case. That our tools are monitoring a high percentage of the devices that are out there on the network. So we're not missing, or we have huge gaps.
Right.
Also, it has to be focused on the data. The data has to be useful. As we add sensors, as we add monitors, it becomes an exponential data problem. And if we do not have solid standards in place, it all falls apart very rapidly, and it gets completely untenable. You have to have a fairly strong centrally managed approach. Governance is critical, but everybody has to be on board. It can't be just the coalition of the willing, everybody out doing their own thing. It's got to be very coordinated, very planned. Your execution has to be precise, or you're just wasting a lot of time, effort, and money.
I'm sure. If you have a vulnerability anywhere, it's got to cover the full scope of the problem rather than because the bad guys will look for the weakest area to attack.
Exactly. You're only as strong as your weakest link.
Right. Rod, Turk, what do you think are some lessons learned going through the process here?
I found, Jim, that in the world of cybersecurity and even the CIO position across all the federal government, the issues that we're dealing with are by and large the same. So there's a big benefit in gathering together in a working group, let's say, or in a group of like-minded kinds of security folks who are doing the same kinds, making the same kinds of investments in the tools that we are at Commerce, that we can get together, sit across the table from each other or on a telephone call and share those lessons learned, share those best practices.
Yeah,
and that way we can save money, we can make the time to market, let's say, making the investments as well as the implementation within our departments quicker, easier. And one of the biggest things that I've found is just change management.
Right.
Within the Department of Commerce, we're a very federated organization. We have 12 different components, each of which have a CIO and do their own thing, if you will, in certain respects. So bringing all of them together in a Commerce working group as well as an interdepartmental working group. We've worked with Bill at State, several of the other CISOs within the Beltway here, and we have gathered in a lot of lessons learned that have helped us significantly in pulling together our implementation of CDM. And the biggest thing that comes to mind for me is the change management piece.
Okay.
Making sure that as we implement these tools, that we do the training, we do the communications, that everybody knows what our strategic plan is as we go forward with these particular tools.
Yeah, terrific. What a great idea. We'll talk to each other and share ideas and so forth. But, just an observation with this particular panel, the government people in particular, when you walked in, you all knew each other. We've had other panels on subjects where I feel like I'm introducing people for the first time to the people that they're, coordinating with and so forth. So I think that's a healthy sign. That Richard, Marcell, how about some lessons learned from your perspective?
Right, Jim. So I'm going to go on from what Mr. Lay said, because he really captured quite well what our experiences have been too. So first of all, it's really critical that we bring in the broad user community that will have access to the continuous monitoring data. There's information assurance staff, there's IT staff across the Army, and the Army is very complex and very broad. And so if you're going to get real value out of the data, you have to start off on these projects with bringing them to the table, because ultimately we want them to use the data to secure the environment, so they have to be a player. So it's critical that communication be in place from day one and is sustained throughout the project. Secondly, controlling expectation is critical. People will make assumptions, especially leadership. So it's very important that you define very, very precisely what it is you're going to deliver and how that will enhance the environment.
Right.
And finally, metrics. It's really metrics that we're focused on in all of these projects to show exactly how it is contributing to the security of the Army's networks, and also to show how that investment is really contributing to overall Army mission. So we spend considerable time in that area as well.
Yeah, because that's a tough one. I mean, face it, the ROI on security things is always a difficult one, especially in industry where you're worried about revenues and stockholders' equity and cutting cost, and then it's hard to justify some of these investments.
In our case, of course, it's not ROI. It's can we demonstrate that we've actually enhanced the security of the network because we're always
having the metrics.
Yes, because we're always concerned about. Could we have another unauthorized data loss?
Sure.
And so that's a very, very focused area. And we spend time thinking through very carefully about what those metrics are to help us really realize where our gaps are, and so we can address them in the future.
Terrific. John, I purposely left you for the last government person on the lessons learned, because I feel like you're sort of smack dab right in the center of all this, so you probably see an awful lot of things. And probably have seen a lot of lessons learned through the process. Can you share some of those with us?
Well, some great points from the government colleagues that they've just highlighted. Taking first your thought about return on investment, although we're very early and some of the greatest gains the government will see will come from the long-term measurement of outcomes and the metrics my colleague from the Department of Army mentioned, but I'm very pleased to tell you that, building on the comments of Rod and Bill Lay, that we found in civilian government when we worked together that concentrated on design once and use many, that we experienced, due to the heavy competition on the continuous monitoring as a service contract, that there was $26 million of budget avoidance on the first $60 million order that we occurred during January. And that budget avoidance of $26 million, from the best we can determine, will pay much of the expenses for the entire continuous diagnostics and mitigation program in the first years. And as we're about to begin a much larger purchase of sensors and services under the mechanisms of joint competition in our partnership with GSA FedSim, I think that those savings will continue to mount. So we get a benefit by working together at the front end with acquisition, but we taking the thought of collaboration to the next level. Over the years in conflict, there have been some extraordinary mistakes using techniques like the Maginot Line in World War I, or the phalanx if you go back to classical times, where adversaries will run around the end of layered defenses and cause enormous trouble getting into the most sensitive areas where the government systems are managing. So our conclusion is that we can't have any screen doors for the nation-state adversaries to kick through. We need to have a broad and involved support, and that's why the Diagnostics and Mitigation Program and earlier work at the Defense Department on the host-based security system saw to it that no organization was left behind on basic security. So our phase one that'll go into competition the next 20 weeks, as I mentioned, is going to provide hardware asset management, software asset management and basic whitelisting, vulnerability management, and configuration setting management tools to everyone in .gov. And I'm pleased to tell you that that same basic tool set is going to be available to the 50 state governments, local governments, territory, and tribal activities under the Cooperative Purchasing Program. So I think this is one of the cases where the government, both military and civilian, saw to it that many good things were going to come from working together, and that has been noticed by Congress in a way that they've offered New Start anomaly authority. We were able to execute during FY 2013, even in the midst of a continuing resolution. So here's a case that not only the executive branch, but also the legislative branch has been very supportive in getting those basic tool sets out to the government sector. So we have a good foundation. I think what we really have to watch for is that deploying these sensors by itself is not enough.
Right.
We have to get those sensors in place and begin acting on the known vulnerabilities, and from that we'll get those positive measured outcomes that the Army is aspiring toward.
Right. Yeah. You don't want the complacency. People feeling, oh, well, we have sensors now, so that means some of our other responsibilities now are not. You got to keep the awareness up that there's that it covers. And I like that design. Once, use many. I'm sure it's intuitively obvious that the cost to do this is significantly lower across government compared to if every agency were doing their own thing. So that design once, use many, I think, sort of goes towards that ROI issue. How about over in our industry folks here? Scott, what are you seeing for some lessons learned for as you've been working these issues?
So if you listen to our government panelists, they covered a variety of really strong benefits and lessons learned between intra and interagency communication, the need for analytics, the need for dashboarding, the need for information sharing, whether it's via sticks or some other method. And those are all great lessons learned. I want to address potentially two things that I think many organizations may be overlooking. And one of them is vector. At the advent of wireless, people rushed to wireless long before they looked at what the security implications were. At the advent of virtualization, people rushed to virtualization long before they looked to the security implications. And with cloud, people are heading headlong into cloud without looking at the security implications.
I think that scenario has been around for years and years.
And it'll continue.
Security is always trying to catch up.
Absolutely, it'll continue to do so. A vector does not change your security landscape. It may change some of the shapes and sizes, but it doesn't change the overall need for data security. And I would say that's aspect one. The other one is the nature of computing itself has changed pretty dramatically as well. And I would say that 5-6 years ago, everyone here on this panel may have been carrying one IP-enabled device, and now maybe they have 3 to 5. The nature of computing itself, your next refrigerator will have an IP address. Your current refrigerator may have an IP address. In recent retail breaches, it was the HVAC system that was compromised in order for the malware to come in and move laterally. Public, if you think about commerce and the FirstNet initiative, public safety equipment all has IP addresses. And I think that when you read press about CDM, what you see most traditionally is desktop, laptop, server.
Right.
And I think we need to be longer sighted than that as we build this evolving framework to encompass the entire computing landscape rather than a segment of it.
Right, I agree. And I actually taught cybersecurity for 17 years at the graduate level at the University of Maryland on Saturdays. And I used to try to simplify a subject that's hard to simplify. You've got the perimeter security and the monitoring you need to do at the perimeter. You got the data itself at rest that needs to be protected, but then you've got all the devices inside the network and the handheld devices. You can't forget the devices too, because they're a big part of the equation.
I really do believe that the CDM framework, it gives us the ability to say we're going to encompass our vectors and our compute space. We just need to do that extra step to include that thinking when we're doing our CDM rollouts and planning.
Right. Matt Dean, what do you think? What are some lessons learned you're seeing as you work these programs?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly agree with what pretty much everybody has said, and something that I've seen over the last 10 years of rolling out monitoring software. And that's that data is not enough. We have to focus on people and processes that react to that data. It's not good enough just to understand some things that are happening, to understand current behavior. It is much more important that we focus on the change management process, for instance, as a way to react to some of these scenarios. And so I'm thrilled that continuous monitoring is a process has been so central, I think, to being successful in the continuous monitoring program, and it's great to see that continuing.
Yeah, it really is. It's there have been success stories, but it's still rare to see a government-wide activity that seems to be making good progress right along without too many hiccups along the way. Let's talk a little bit about priorities now. And maybe we combine it too with challenges. Talk about some of your priorities for the year, upcoming year, and maybe some of the challenges that you still think you need to overcome in order to get where you want to go. Let's start this time with Richard Marcell. Richard, what are some of your priorities that you have the upcoming year, and then maybe some of the challenges you're looking at?
So our primary priorities is to continue to enhance the cybersecurity of the Army's networks, and that means continuing our efforts with DISA to stand up new infrastructure on the classified network to actually protect that perimeter in a more sophisticated manner. We're also focused on continuing to roll out this fiscal year, and actually this calendar year, additional UAM, user activity monitoring capability on other Army networks, with the goal of eventually, bringing that across all the fabric, so that we can have real insight into what folks are doing as they're accessing our resources. And then finally, we are working to bring big data analytics into the cyber arena, and looking at cloud technology. And so the challenge is this: we have all these sensors on the network. They're collecting tremendous amounts of data. We have today a suite of tools that allow us to interrogate those data. However, that's very labor intensive. How can we use big data analytics to help drive that down, so we can look at more of the data and get more value out of it? And so we have initiatives in that area, and we look to bring those online to really give us a tremendous boost to our ability to understand what's going on across the network.
Yeah, I recently ran an innovation workshop, and we had some companies, and I don't name company names on the show, but there were some exciting things with monitoring and sensors and things like that. Companies coming out with products that can, a tool can replace like 15 tools. The Band-Aids we've been putting in place over the years to fix all the problems. There's now tool sets coming out that allow you to retire a lot of those legacy equipment with a tool that can consolidate all that. And I think things like that, the industry is aware are next steps here, and I think we'll see a lot of creativity coming as we move through on this.
This is a really important area because we have really fixed resources on the human side, and we have more data that we can handle. How can we leverage these new technologies that are being employed in the commercial sector on the internet? How can we bring them into our space?
Right.
And really maximize all of the things that we have. And so that's a very important focus for the Army.
Yeah, terrific. And I want to continue this dialogue on benefits and challenges, but first we need to take another short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with John Streufert from Homeland Security, Rod Turk from Commerce, Bill Lay from Department of State, Richard Marcell from the U.S. Army, Scott Montgomery from Intel Security, and Matt Dean from Firemon. We're talking continuous diagnostic monitoring. When we went to break, we started talking about some of the priorities for the upcoming year, as well as some of the challenges that you're faced. Let's go to John Streufert. John, what are some of your priorities for the upcoming year, and maybe a couple of the challenges that you think you're going to have to overcome to reach those goals?
Well, let's go back to Scott Montgomery's thought about treating continuous diagnostics as metaphorically as similar to a nervous system.
Okay.
So I think the number one challenge is that we can have almost perfect diagnostics functioning like the senses in a human organism. But if we don't insert a dashboard which functions like the brainstem to queue up the worst problems first for mitigation, where are we? We've spent a fair amount of money. We have perfect awareness of what our problems are, but we've never gotten to the action step. As one of my colleagues in the Marine Corps referred to it recently in an interview, you're admiring the problem rather than fixing the problem. So I think the number one challenge across both military, civilian, and the CNSS space in the coming months, you're going to see some of the first sensors that have ever been put in the civilian side of government. You'll be taking that sensing capability in the military to the next level. But can we gather up those overall trends into an environment where we can prioritize our worst problems in the government sector for action. And so I really believe that we have a multi-stage process. There's a good, rigorous program in place with the excellent participation I've mentioned. But after the sensors are in there, we all need to meet at both local dashboards and lift up to a second or third layer of abstraction and find out what those trends are in the cyber attacks across government so that we can actually become safer as a result of all the work that we're undertaking.
Yeah, terrific. I think that's you drilled home a point there. The whole purpose is to become safer here. And great point with that, too. I used to feel that way a lot about risk analysis. We bring in a company and we do spend months and months and months on one system, but in reality, that system may not be anywhere near the worst problem. The worst problem may be somewhere else. And so, you know, you run that problem of spending a lot of time and effort on the wrong thing. So I think your idea of trying to identify with the dashboard what is the real priority is real important. Bill A., what do you think? What are some of the priorities you have for the year and some of the challenges that you're facing?
One of the big priorities we have for this coming year is historically federal networks have been flat or unsegmented networks. We go out, roll out a huge network, and basically say, y'all come, and everybody gets on board. And we don't have a lot of regard for different, what I call security classes of service.
Right.
We've got low impact all the way to high impact out there in the same community, if you will. We're taking a cue from a lot of our corporate partners that have already gone down this path and segmenting our international global network. This will allow us to segment and separate those high critical areas from those areas that may be more public-facing, that are less fraught with peril.
Right.
What that will allow us to do is tailor our FISMA approach. That will allow us to change our boundary ranges, which should give some relief through common controls to our system owners, which will reduce their cost of execution. And in the continuous monitoring arena, we'll reorient our sensors and monitors so we can be more localized and specific in our information.
Right.
With that, we'll be able to pull it together, and we're deploying some decision support tools to focus on our risk posture. What is our risk situation that's informed from the due diligence of FISMA and the real-time situational awareness of CDM, to come up with a better sight picture for our decision makers when it comes to resource allocation.
Yeah, terrific. I know I remember talking to the Secretary of the Treasury. There was a concern because a couple of government websites were hacked, and I remember him being all upset. Could this happen to us? I remember saying, Mr. Secretary, yeah, it can happen, and we can fix it right away, but there's no data there. There's no real risk to our agency there. It really doesn't make sense to make that our top priority and start throwing all the money that direction, because we can fix it in minutes, and there's no vulnerability there. There's no data disappearing. Rod, Turk, what do you think? What are some of your priorities for the year and maybe some challenges that you see you need to overcome?
Well, I found out over many years that you can have all the tools in your toolbox, the wrenches, the pliers, et cetera, unless you know how to use them and actually use them, they're not going to be of any benefit to you. So one of the things that we're looking at the Department of Commerce is we're developing an enterprise security oversight center. Many of our component agencies have security operations centers. We want to take the information we're getting from our tool that John has helped us with, take that information, take the information from the security operations centers, and compile that into an enterprise view so that we can then hopefully get some early warning type of information for all of our components. We're going to couple that with potentially with intelligence feeds, so we can see where the threat vectors may be, where that threat vector may be moving, and then how we can position the Department of Commerce at an enterprise level to be able to respond to that. Also, if we're starting to see infiltrations of malware into components within the department, then we can also then do a focused, hopefully a focused remediation, because with the tool, we should be able to tell what assets are being targeted and then what the patch levels potentially are of those assets so that we can do something about it, hopefully, before it gets to be too big of an issue.
Sure.
So our goal this year is to lay the foundation for our oversight center, gathering information from all of the components and then putting that together for knowledge that we can use to help protect the Department of Commerce.
Terrific. Sounds great. All planned out well. We're down to about 12 minutes to go in the show, and what we always like to do with all the shows is to try to talk about where this is all going. You know, what's the future going to look like? What are what should we expect down the road on this? Will we get to a point where we are proactive enough to get out in front of the threats and prevent most cyber attacks? So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give me your thoughts of where this is all going. We'll start with Richard Marcell. Richard, what do you think? Where's this all going down the road?
Jim, I really like the word proactive because, quite frankly, that's what we really want. We want to get to the point where we're anticipating activities happening on the network. And I think the way to go about doing that is to begin to leverage the big data analytics because we do have a tremendous amount of data that we're really not leveraging today. The key thing about moving to that approach is that you can, over time, set up patterns of behavior and various types of models that will interrogate those data for you and then give you indicators that the analyst can go off and look at. So I believe that's the way to move forward and to really to structure ourselves, to be proactive and get on with the mission set.
I like that. Matt Dean at Firemon, where's this all going? What's the future look like?
I think we're moving towards automation. I really think we are moving to the place where we have an understanding of our threats, an understanding of our assets, and the network in between, and the notion of statically configuring that network to protect those assets may go away as we have additional systems, as we have big data, as we have analytics that collect all this information and provide us some results. We will move to the point where statically configuring the network, for instance, will go away. And we will pull this information from that analytics, and the network will be extremely adaptable much more rapidly than it is today.
Yeah, sort of self-healing networks that are automatic of detecting the malicious threats and fixing themselves. Bill Lay, Department of State. Bill, what do you see as the future look like? Where's this all going? Are we going to get to that state where, cybersecurity isn't on the front page every day with people worried about it, and it becomes something where we feel that we're much more confident?
Well, I'm pretty confident cybersecurity is a growth industry. We're not going to work ourselves out of a job anytime soon.
A good point there in terms of just looking at the number of students that are taking cybersecurity. The classes all sell out.
It's an excellent career choice for new students. But I agree with my two colleagues. It is a big data problem. It is about getting manual intervention out of the equation and making it automated. As we see non-traditional network devices, we're moving quickly away from just having the luxury of just PCs and laptops. We have a myriad of mobile and especially wireless devices that we have to account for. The lifespan of these devices, since they're consumer grade many times, is about 18 months. So you don't have a lot of time to, as John said, admire the problem. You have to get after it. Yeah. So it is about getting our sensors, our monitors out there, getting it on the systems early, and tying it into an automated system. We're looking at data feeds that are in excess of a terabyte or 2 terabytes per day. Sure. And so in order to do trending and long-term analysis, in order to be able to respond to an intrusion or attack vector, we can't take weeks or months to respond. It's got to be much more real time, or we're going to have smoking craters on a lot of our infrastructure.
In an era where time is approaching zero.
Correct. Our adversaries can operate much quicker than we can respond. And we have to close that gap tremendously. Terrific. But it is about getting after the data and getting our arms around it, making it actionable.
Terrific. Scott Montgomery, what's it look like in your crystal ball? Where is this going?
So, no, automation is absolutely the key word. And what I would say is you have flat budgets, a relatively flat sized pool of trained practitioners. You have an expanding IP footprint and an expanding number of attacks against it. You've got shifting mission, sometimes conflicting mission goals. So what are the two things that practitioners control? They only control two things in this bad math equation. They control the methods they use, and they control the efficiency of their labor hours. And it's this latter one, the efficiency of the labor hours, where automation is really going to assist.
Right.
And I agree 100% with John's assessment about the brainstem. If we have data, if we have actionable data, and we have high confidence in that data, then we should trust these systems to enact policy that we set automatically and reduce the overall effort that practitioners have to do manually over and over and over again. It has to be automated.
Yeah, terrific, terrific. I think so too. And back to Bill's point, wait till the kids get into the workforce. We haven't seen anything yet in terms of use of devices and levels of data. Turk, what's it look like to you? Where's this all going?
I long for the day when the security folks can be at least even with the technology. We mentioned earlier how many times we actually lag. We're running for the train as it leaves the station.
Yeah.
I long for the day when we can stay at least even with the technology. But I think for me, I think there's a strategic planning process that needs to take place. I like the word resilience. I like to be able to look forward and say that we can actually respond to any infiltration and take care of that infiltration without being a major hazard to the organization. And I also like the term for the kill chain methodology, where you can take a look at the life cycle of a piece of malware and then insert tools, processes, procedures throughout that life cycle to be able to intercept that particular piece of malware and then eradicate it from your systems. So those are the things that we're looking at within the Department of Commerce to develop our strategic plan.
Yeah, that idea of always trying to catch up, I always think of, when you look at computing, the idea, just the idea that the term firewall came to exist makes you wonder if the systems would have been built secure to begin with, we wouldn't have to have a firewall to protect from the systems. And it's like that. I think companies come out with technology without thinking through the security implications, which means the security people then have to catch back up to the technology. John Streufert, John, what's it look like from your vantage point? Where's this all going down the road? What should we expect?
Well, taking the thoughts of Scott about leveraging automation and Rod's concerns that the human part of the equation can keep up, I think we're going to have to do what computer chips do and get deeply into multitasking. So we at the Department of Homeland Security Federal Network Resilience are planning for a series of operational, tactical, and strategic activities to all be occurring at once within the next year. Let's deal with them in turn. Operationally, we're going to be concentrating in that first phase on what is the risk on devices, these four categories I've mentioned:
Right.
Hardware asset management, software asset management and basic whitelisting, vulnerability management, and configuration setting compliance. Those task competitions are going to be underway in the coming weeks here. We need to get those awarded with the good and best solutions from our industry partners. We need to get it out across the .gov networks and connected to the dashboard, which, by the way, will be entering into some initial operating capability early in next calendar year. Strategically, we're going to be concentrating on managing events, and that is activity that will probably get underway in FY15 and FY16 and later. And my colleague from the Department of Army is absolutely on track. The way that threats are evolving, we're going to have to move our log data and event data into the cloud, get that signal to noise ratio at the point where we can see where those threats are coming in, and the advantage of the cloud will come to us along with those threats that we're already seeing for both mobile and the shared services kind of environments. Tactically, we're going to turn and have, as of the 21st of April, attend to the question of who is where on the network and why, to give you the plain language description. We're worried about privileges. Right. If you go to the major publications recently, we've had a system administrator here, a user there that had more permissions on the network than they ever should have had. So working with our colleagues in the research community, we've come up with a concept called a privilege score. We're going to put out a set of tools gather what privileges have been granted to some of the key personnel that are operating the network and end users. And if their authorities are out of range, we want to tag that just like we would for worst problems first on a vulnerability or configuration setting weakness, and pull those privileges back into line. If you step back from it, we're into a activity that will protect networks first, but a number of our experts have commented that we need to move toward protecting those sensitive applications. So we're in the process of launching a strategy within federal network resilience called Critical Application Resilience, and we expect to go through the same activities for both custom software and the cloud applications of government. So I think, Jim, should we be here 10 years from now, we're going to be scoring operational, tactical, and strategic gains, not only on our network protections, but also on the critical and sensitive data applications that we have.
Terrific. Well said. Let me try to do a real quick wrap up here. I heard a lot of great stuff here. Right out of the box, 96% of the .gov domain being addressed, all 23 agencies playing. I picked up cyber hygiene and resiliency as two areas, two analogies that we used here that are quite useful in understanding this. Lessons learned dealt with sharing information, importance of metrics, the idea of design once, use many as a way of reducing costs for everyone. Priorities and challenges, I heard we need to focus on the highest risks first, the worst problems first, and focus our attention that way. Future, the idea is to get proactive, to get out in front, to use more automation, more multitasking, and look at the privilege question. Who is on the network and who it belongs on the network and what privilege do they have? I see a future where agencies will be able to focus more and more on mission and not be worried about the infrastructure and the vulnerabilities. With that, I want to first thank our panelists for all taking time from their very busy schedules, and you're doing very, very important work for our country. So thank you for being here to share some of that work with us. Thanks to our sponsors, without which we don't have a show. Thanks to the good people here at Federal News Radio. And most importantly, thanks to our listening audience. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.